Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, and welcome to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. By day, I'm a partner at a leading advisory firm where I draw upon my background as an attorney to help my clients succeed. This podcast, though, is my personal project, completely separate and apart from my day job, but reflect the same passion that I exhibit everywhere for teaching, mentoring, and helping others succeed through simple, impactful lessons. It is my hope that you'll walk away with practical takeaways to help you on your leadership journey. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining me in the Leadership Lab. Let's get started. We have been collectively sold this idea that the more data that we have, the better decisions as leaders we can make. But what nobody is telling you is that leaders making the best decisions right now have access to less information than you do, not more. Why? Because they have just gotten better at ignoring what doesn't matter. And possessing that skill of knowing what to ignore is exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. Most leaders have a plethora of business intelligence dashboards at their fingertips. They have lots of analytics, lots of real-time metrics on data points ranging from everything from employee surveys, market reports, and competitive intelligence. And now we have generative AI created insights giving us even more outputs even faster. And what's interesting is that every tool promises to provide us with more clarity. And every platform that's being sold claims that they can actually make us smarter. But ironically, the data says otherwise. The data says that leaders today are actually making slower decisions with less confidence than we did years ago. Why? Executives are spending an average of 23 hours per week in meetings with additional hours reviewing reports and analytics. That's consuming information before making decisions, a massive investment of time and cognitive energy. And here's the kicker. All of that data hasn't made decisions any better. McKinsey research found that 61% of executives said at least half the time they spent making decisions were ineffective. The problem isn't that we don't have enough data, but rather the problem is that we don't have a system for deciding which data deserves our attention and which is just noise. Now, I've spent 2 decades helping organizations manage information in high-stakes situations. Think millions of documents where missing the wrong detail could cost millions of dollars. Early in my career, I watched teams drown in data, convinced that reviewing everything, including every piece of paper, was the path to success. But we all know that isn't always the right answer. The teams that won weren't the ones who collected the most data. They're the ones who could triage faster and focus harder on what moved the needle. So here's what I've learned over the years. 90% of data is context. 10% is actionable intelligence. And as leaders, our job isn't to know everything. Our job as leaders is to know what to ignore. And most leaders never learn this distinction. They treat every metric like it matters equally. Every report gets the same level of scrutiny, and every dashboard demands the utmost attention. To be clear, I do not believe that that is thoroughness. What I believe is that that creates analysis paralysis dressed up as diligence. So to help you create better use of your time, I developed something that I call the Rapid Decision Triage Protocol. So Rapid is an acronym that we're going to go over. I designed this to move you from information overload to decision clarity, hopefully in minutes and not in hours, days, or weeks. So the R in the acronym stands for relevance. If you could apply a relevance filter before you dive into any data and ask just this one question, Does this information change a decision I'm making this week? Not eventually, but this week. If it doesn't change a decision this week, it is not urgent. It may be important, but it is not urgent. And I'm going to encourage you to just park it and come back to it. Okay. So that is a relevance filter. That's the R in the acronym. Now the A in the acronym stands for authority. So what does that mean? Who owns the decision? We need to do an authority check here. Who owns the decision and what is my role? Are you the decision maker? Are you just an advisor or are you just being informed? If you are not the decision maker, your level of analysis should actually match your level of authority. So if you are doing deep dives on something that is not your decision to make, then you're not making a good use of your time. So that is authority, A for authority. So let's go on to the P. P stands for proportionality. How much analysis does this decision actually deserve? So we need to put our time and the money and think proportionally. For instance, a $50 million decision deserves more time than a $5,000 decision. If you're spending the same amount of time on both a $50 million decision and a $5,000 one, that's the problem. As we talked about in episode 21 of the Gold Standard Leadership Lab, when the metrics mislead, hitting the numbers isn't the same as winning. The same applies here. Analyzing everything isn't the same as making better decisions, more efficient decisions. Okay, so that's P, proportionality. Let's talk about I. I stands for impact. So let's perform an impact assessment. What happens if you get this decision wrong? Look, not every decision deserves the same level of certainty, very similar to proportionality. Some decisions are reversible. Some are one-way doors. So spend your cognitive energy accordingly. We have to be able to keep it in reserves. If you're spending the same amount of time on every single decision, both large and small, then we are not spending our cognitive energy wisely. All right. So that's impact. So now let's talk about the D. D is decide or delegate. And I love this because, and hat tip to David Allen of the famed book, Getting Things Done, because I often like this as being a 2-minute or less decision. If I need to decide, and that's for me, that's great. If I need to delegate, that's really important to know because I don't need to spend my cognitive energy on something that is not for me and need to give it to somebody else. And this is actually where most leaders start to fall apart. They gather data, they analyze it, they discuss it, and then schedule another meeting to review more data. At some point, you have to pull the trigger. At some point, you have to realize if you have enough information to make a 70% confident decision, make it. If you don't, then just delegate the information gathering to someone else while you focus on the decisions that only you as a leader in your role can actually make. That is a more effective use of your time. Now, remember what I shared in episode 17, do we really need another meeting? I mentioned it before, executives are spending more than 20 hours a week in meetings. I can relate to this. And yet most of those hours are unproductive and misaligned. People come to meetings that don't have an agenda written in the body of the calendar invite. People accept meetings when there is no outcomes that are going to be discussed. And people join the meetings when the right decision makers aren't even there and yet spend 30 minutes on the call. The same discipline applies to data review. Just because information exists doesn't mean that you need to consume it. And here's what most leadership advice gets wrong. They frame this as a trade-off. I don't understand this. You can have fast decisions or good decisions, but not both. I disagree. Speed is quality when you're deciding on the right information. Slow decisions based on comprehensive data aren't better, they're just slower. Fast decisions based on the 10% of data that actually matters, those are the decisions that move organizations forward. High-performing teams make faster decisions with less information. Research from Stanford found that the fast decision makers had access to less information than their slower counterparts, not more. They just got better at identifying leading indicators and ignoring lagging noise. So this connects directly to what we discussed in episode 19, when successful leaders fail. Success can blind you to failure. When you're overwhelmed with data, you assume you're being thorough. You're not. You're coasting on the illusion of analysis while actual clarity slips away. So I want to talk about what is called the 90% certainty myth. Here's a conversation that happens in boardrooms everywhere, I'm sure. It goes something like this. I need more data before I can decide. The response, how sure do you need to be? The leader says, well, at least 90%. The person responds, and where are you now? The leader says, maybe 75%. Let me tell you something that will save you weeks of unnecessary analysis. You will never get to 90% certainty on a forward-looking strategic decision. Ever. The future is unknowable. Market conditions shift, as we have seen here in the United States. Competitors move, customer preferences evolve. The variables you're trying to model don't hold still long enough to give you the certainty of the 90% you're chasing. The best that you can do is get to 70 to 75% confidence and make a decision that's reversible if you're wrong. That last 15 to 20% certainty you're chasing, it isn't real. What does exist is the opportunity cost of waiting while you're gathering more data and your competitors are moving, the market is shifting, and your team is stuck in neutral. The leaders who win understand this. They don't wait for perfect information. They make high-quality decisions with good enough data, and then they iterate on what they learn. The tenets of the golden leadership cycle that I created here, reinvention, resilience, and empowerment, and which make up the foundation and overall framework of everything that I do here on the Gold Standard Leadership Lab, demand that you reinvent how you process information, show resilience in the face of uncertainty, and empower yourself to decide with conviction even when data is incomplete. So here's your practical takeaway for this week. I want you to go ahead and audit your last 5 decisions that you made. And for each one, I want you to write down the following. How much time did you spend gathering the information? Second, how much of that information actually changed your thinking? Number 3, how confident were you when you finally decided? And finally, number 4, whether more time would have increased that confidence. Here's my bet. My bet is that you'll find the same pattern I see everywhere. More time gathering data rarely increases decision confidence, but what it always does is delay action. The leaders who win aren't the ones with the most data. They're the ones who can cut through the noise, identify what matters, and decide with speed and with conviction. Indecision, after all, is actually a decision. It's just the quietest way to fail in disguise. And if the rapid decision triage protocol resonates with you, share it with another leader who's drowning in dashboards, but starving for clarity. But most of all, remember, leadership isn't about perfection. It is about progress. Take this lesson, put it into action, and continue setting the gold standard in your own life and at work. See you all next time.